Now, let's return to an issue we touched on the programme yesterday. Just how do you reconstruct Ukraine, especially as the conflict shows no signs of slowing? It is nonetheless something world leaders are discussing in Germany today on day 2 of the Reconstructing Ukraine Summit. It's a question, too, we put to Professor Sultan Barakat. He's a senior fellow at the UK's Royal United Services Institute foreign policy think tank, but also he's got 3 decades experience working in post-war reconstruction. His latest book is on Russia's previous approaches to post-conflict reconstruction, so plenty to chat to him about when we caught up with him in Doha, Qatar.
It feels a little bit as if we are repeating the stories of how we traditionally have approached the subject. That is, big international conferences with a lot of maybe theoretical examination of the context and pledging of money, but not real action on the ground. And you can understand from donors' perspectives who want to help, it's very difficult to commit to reconstruction while the conflict is ongoing. At the same time, they want to show that solidarity just to help the Ukrainians. So it's a difficult position at this moment.
Yeah. There's also been a lot of chopping and changing, even just very recently, right? The infrastructure minister going, a lot of chopping and changing of the people who are kind of responsible for some of that reconstruction within the Ukrainian government. You've got 3 decades worth of experience in this, in conflicts all around the world. How hard is that when the characters involved keep changing at that pace, to have those lines of communication about what that reconstruction could or couldn't look like as well?
Well, it is obviously going to be hard and confusing and difficult to adjust to. Within Ukraine, unfortunately, there has been a deep-rooted culture of corruption that has made it very difficult to trust the local authorities with money. And the reaction from the European countries has been to demand greater transparency, reforms. And those kind of reforms become twice as difficult to undertake while the war is ongoing. So the Ukrainian government, I mean, they're doomed if they do, or they're doomed if they don't. If they don't reform, they're very unlikely to receive the amount of pledges that has been made. And if they do reform, then they will inevitably go through
someone's going to get upset,
confusion.
Yeah.
Someone will be upset, and also they will go through a phase of inaction, because this is how things are. We replace leaders. People wait to see what happens next.
Russia specifically, then, your new book focuses right on this, Professor. Why don't you take to the meat of the title of your book, or what has Russia's approach been to post-conflict reconstruction?
Since the Second World War onwards, one very clear trend is that in all their intervention in Ossetia and other border areas of Russia, they haven't really moved very far from how the Soviet Union used to conduct its policies. Very centralized, heavy-handed, top-down, relying a lot on in-kind support and not on facilitation of finance. But very importantly, in none of those areas that they have either, between brackets, liberated or given self-determination, in none of those areas have they invested sufficiently to allow them to become a thriving economy. All those boundaries areas have really been turned into buffer zones, focused almost entirely on issues of security. And that has really made us consider or think again of what benefit those Russian-speaking communities would get as a result of being separated from Ukraine. They are going to end up on the periphery of a huge country and will, at best, be treated as the front line for defense.
That's, of course, one potential outcome of all of this. The other is, of course, what they're discussing at this conference, which is that they hope that the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine remains as it is on the map at the moment, at the very least, and that those reconstruction efforts will have to go towards funding all of that, which will include some of those areas that you talk about, some of the worst hit, some that will need the most amount of finance going into it. Are there lessons that you hope people are taking on board at this conference so they can draw out from other conflicts that you've worked in the kind of reconstruction process on?
I mean, I think focusing exclusively on reconstructing areas that at the moment are still under Russian occupation is not a good idea. What would be more productive is now to rebuild the areas that are under control of Ukraine and help the Ukrainians to bring the population back to those areas as a way to ensure that the land is not empty. Experience has shown us in many conflicts, whether between Iraq and Iran, Israel and Lebanon, empty land is an invitation for further invasion. Those lands got to be reconstructed as soon as possible, people encouraged to return so that some kind of normality returns and productivity into those areas. And then from there, you think about what is coming next.
Professor Sultan Barakat there.